Le webinaire va bientôt commencer. Veuillez rester en ligne. La diffusion vient de démarrer. Tous les participants sont en mode écoute seule.
Afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to this web briefing session by the co-chairs on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, the first draft. We are very pleased to be here with the co-chairs who we have supported during this time. We will have two briefing sessions today to accommodate the different time zones. One is now at 8 a.m. Montreal time, and the second will be at 8 p.m. Montreal time. Before we start, I just wanted to provide some logistical updates. Following the co-chair's presentation, which will be about half an hour, we will give you about approximately an hour or so to take up your questions for clarification and understanding on the framework. So, to ask a question, please type it in the question box. For participants dialing in by phone, we will give you a chance to ask your questions of clarification and understanding orally before we turn to answering written questions and from other participants. For anyone joining us through Facebook or YouTube, you can send us your questions by email to live@cbd.int. So that is live, L-I-V-E, @cbd.int. I will moderate your questions and address them to the co-chairs. Kindly be reminded, this is not a negotiation session, but an opportunity for you to seek clarification on the different aspects of the first draft of the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework. This session is being recorded and will be posted on the CBD website. I will now hand over to the co-chairs, Mr. Francis Ogwal of Uganda and Mr. Basil Van Havre of Canada. Thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Jyoti. On behalf of Francis and myself, warm welcome to this briefing. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We will present the first draft of the GBF that was released on July 12 in all 6 languages. The aim here is to familiarize you with the structure and the content of draft 1 and give you a chance to ask and for us to answer your question. And we've also scheduled some time to explain a little bit what is happening on the way to working group 3. Please keep in mind, this is not a negotiation session. The time for negotiation will come. The aim here is to explain what we present as a base for your work. So without further ado, I'll pass the floor to Francis, and I will share my screen so that you get to see the presentation. Francis, over to you.
Thank you, co-chair. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Time difference observed. We shall be sharing this presentation. I'll take on some slides, and then Basil will complete them. So, and that starts the session. You will see there the co-chairs is Francis Ogwal, myself, and Basil Van Havre. So we are going to give you, like you said, an update on the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, but we are going to focus on draft 1 and also the DIS process. So if you can go to the next slide, please. My co-chair is the one that is facilitating the movement of the slide. So how we're approaching the presentation 1, we are going to give you the context of this framework, what informed the development of the framework itself. We're going to hear that. And after that, then we delve in a little bit into the draft 1 itself. And then we shall give you an update on digital sequence information. And we know that this is an area that often people are asking a lot of questions about. But then we look at overview of the post-2020 process. Where are we? For those of you who might have been joining us for the first time, what is ahead of us? Coach has already said that. And then I think after that, we should be able to wind up the presentation and we'll hear from you. So Basil, you could go to the next slide, please. So just to tell you that this framework itself has been a long journey for us to come up with draft one. For those of you who are familiar with the process already, was that we had actually envisioned or thought that by October last year, 2020, this framework would have already been adopted. But as you can see, circumstances beyond anybody's control, nobody predicted, nobody knew anything, and we find ourselves still on the road. So it might take us actually 4 years or 3.5 or something like that to finish this work. But having said that, we had draft zero, which was ready. This was in January 2020. And that is the one that we took actually to the second meeting of the working group in Rome, and that was in February and March of last year. And from there, we got a mandate from the working group that we should update the draft zero to what then we called updated zero draft, which we did present actually, and it was published in July last year. We did present to you stakeholders. And then I have to say that even if this lockdown has been on, the co-chairs, the team from the Secretariat, we didn't stop working. So we have continued working since then up to now, and we are therefore now presenting draft one of this framework, which was based on, first of all, we looked at even the updated zero draft itself, and then we looked at the outcome of the remaining thematic consultation. There were other consultations that happened after the second meeting of the working group, which I've referred to. And then recently we had the virtual meeting of SAPSA 24 and SBI 3. Now from that meeting, SAPSA 24 and SBI 3, we had close to 2,000 comments. And you see 700 pages for us to take on board in drafting draft one. So we'd like to thank all of you who actually provided these comments. And we've tried our best with the help from the Secretariat to reflect most of this. It wasn't easy. So if you find that in the framework there is still something missing, bear with us. We are still at the point where consultation is going on, and we shall keep improving. Co-chair, you could go to the next draft. The next slide, please. So how is this framework organized? I'll be giving a summary in the theory of change, but for now, let me first introduce to you the goals, the milestones, the mission, the vision, the targets. You'll know that already we have the 2050 vision, which I will refer to later on at some point. Now, for us, the way we have organized the goals, which there are 4, is that these goals are actually status goals. Therefore, they are measurable goals. We want to see, are we making progress towards the 2050 vision? And then on each of those goals, as I will be presenting, there are milestones to help us see, are we making progress to 2030? Because this is a framework for 30 years. 30 years, running from, if we had adopted it already last year, it should have run from 2021 to actually 2050, but with the 10 years of implementation. Now, we are talking of milestone to 2030. So the milestone will help us to see, are we making any progress towards the goals? And for you to achieve the milestone, there's what we call the targets, the action targets. Those are the ones that you implement and see whether you can then report on your milestones. And of course, once you have implemented the targets, you'll get your milestone, you'll get your mission, you get your vision. So that is how it is organized. And you'll be seeing that in shortly in the theory of change. Then, for your information, this draft one has no square brackets. And that should tell you the thinking of the co-chairs, the thinking with the team from the Secretariat, that we should be making progress. So unlike the zero draft and updated zero draft, which had square brackets, this one does not have. And we've tried our best, basing on the outcome of SABSTAR and SBI3, to really put in place numerical values where we had them. But where we couldn't get, then we have tried to make the target smart, not having still, of course, the numerical values in them. So you may see some of the targets without numerical values, but they are still smart enough. And we think they can still be measurable. Co-chair, next slide. So I'm waiting for slide 5, co-chair. Yes. Now, something we have to say to you all here is that this is not a framework just for the CBD or biodiversity. It's a framework for all, because biodiversity touches across so many sectors, across so many. Almost there is nothing, no activity that you could do and it will not impact on biodiversity. So you'll find this is a framework that is for all. So there are many stakeholders we have taken on board, whether you deal with agriculture, you deal with the chemicals, you deal with the climate change, you deal with maybe issues on gender. There are so many aspects you're going to see when we begin talking about the goals, the targets, and those other aspects of the framework. So it is a framework for all. That also makes it not easy for us to develop it, but we've tried to make sure that it is understandable by all this wide range of stakeholders. So the language may not be too much of only focusing on CBD, but trying to be broad as much as we could. And so somewhere you will see that we will try to avoid duplication. We heard that the updated zero draft had a lot of duplications. So we have tried our best to make sure that we avoid those. We went a little bit systematically to really look at where there were elements of duplication, and we have tried our best to do that. Co-chair. I think waiting for the next slide, which should begin. Yes. Now we begin delving here now into the framework. But before this theory of change, if you have managed to download the draft 1, you'll see that there is also part A, part B, and part C. Part A is about background to this framework. Basically, it highlights the importance of biodiversity for human well-being and also for the health of the planet. Whether this planet is a better place because of biodiversity. If biodiversity is not there, you can try to imagine whether life would be here. Human life even itself will not be here. Then B gives you the purpose of the framework, and this framework is basically meant to galvanize urgent and transformative action for us really to make this place a better place in terms of biodiversity. And then you have C that links the framework itself to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. So that is, I wanted to touch that before I come to the theory of change. Now, the theory of change, basically, if you look at it, this is the one upon which we have crafted, upon which we have built on to come with the framework itself. So it captures for you the elements in the framework, even before you have read it. It starts with the part you see on your left, the dark spot. And that is to tell you that that represents where we are today. Things are very bad. You could have been already hearing what's happening globally today. Climate change, the impacts is now getting very, very much of a concern. But science had told us a long time ago that this would happen. We didn't listen. Maybe we are going to listen for biodiversity in this case, not to reach a tipping point. But we shall not stop highlighting that biodiversity loss is occurring. But because of that loss which is happening, then you have got biodiversity loss affecting or jeopardizing human well-being. Look at loss of ecosystem, look at loss of species, look at loss of genetic diversity, look at now what is happening with climate change. You know, we are so vulnerable because of the wrong things that are happening right now. Even sustainable development is being undermined because of loss of biodiversity and ecosystem services it provides. So what we are thinking then with this theory of change is to move away from there to the desired future, that is the vision 2050. And we should by that time be living in harmony with the nature. Doesn't mean you have to wait for around 2048, 2049, and then you begin rushing to try to see what you need to do. we are saying start now to really make peace with the nature, because you need nature more than she needs you, or more than she needs us. Nature can exist even if we are not here, and we all know that. So in the Vision 2050, there are actually 4 elements that I would like to draw your attention to for you to know that you're living with nature. 1, you have to wisely use nature. 2, you have to restore nature. 3, you have to conserve nature. And 4, you have to value. So if you look at those 4 elements and we all anchor around it, we can actually get there. So the framework itself has got the mission, and around it are 3 broad areas where we are going to tackle the action targets. I'll get to that. You have the reducing of the threats, you have meeting needs of people, and then you have tools and solutions. But of course, you cannot do all those action targets if people are not responsible, if there's no transparency, if there's no means of implementation, if the condition for implementation is not conducive. So that's why you see around those action targets, you have means of implementation, you have responsibility and transparency, you have got enabling conditions. Now, once we've put our heads together, and we're going to work very hard in the next 10 years, 20, 30 years to do good to the environment, especially on biodiversity. Otherwise, things will be bad. So once we've worked so hard and we can deliver on the milestones, because I told you the milestone gives us information, progress, how far we are getting to the goals. You then see that there's a shading on the milestones, and then eventually there is a kind of a white space there, meaning the milestones will have delivered us to those goals. And the goals are in 4 areas. We are talking about ecosystem, species, and genetic diversity, human needs to be met, and then benefits are shared equitably, and of course, means of implementation. You are going to see the goals coming into those 4 areas together with the milestones which I'm talking about. So that is the framework for you. The broad elements of it that is there. Co-chair. Yeah, now let's get to the goals. And before I get to the goals themselves, if you look at the updated 0 draft, you'll see a slight change. In that draft itself, we then were having a situation where you would go to the goals, the mission, and the milestones. So you needed to go to the milestone, then come back to the goals to see which goals or which milestone are referring to which goals. But now we have recognized that, and I think Coach talked about us working a little bit on the structure. So you see that we have reorganized, and instead this time, after every goal, then there is the milestones, so that the reader, there's a flow when you read this document, not to read the goals and then you run to the milestone and come back, but immediately just below the goals, you'll find the milestones. Now, I'll be making reference sometimes to the draft, to the draft 1 itself before me here. Draft 1, if you look at the goal A, it has got many elements in there. You're talking about ecosystems, integrity, you're talking about population, resilient population of species. There are a number of things covered in there. But much as you see the text as it is, but they are all unpacked in the milestones, in the targets, and you're going to see that. So what does goal 1 say, or goal A, what does it say? It says the integrity of all ecosystem is enhanced. All ecosystem, whether terrestrial, whether aquatic, whether marine, whether oceans, whether seas, we are saying integrity of all ecosystem is enhanced with an increase in at least 15% in the area connectivity and integrity of natural ecosystems, supporting healthy and resilient population of all species. And this is for our own good. The rate of extinction has been reduced to at least 10-fold, and the risk of species extinction across all taxonomic and functional groups is halved. And genetic diversity of wild and domesticated species is safeguarded with at least 90% of genetic diversity within all species maintained. We heard that we had not given genetic diversity a lot of attention. We have tried this time around to really bring it on board so that that goal A is more broad and can take care of so many of the things that we have had. So there are actually 3 milestones under that. There are 3 milestones under goal A. Milestone A1 says net gain in area, connectivity, and integrity of natural system of at least 5%. And we have something I have to tell you here is that we are talking that 5% by 2030. Remember, by 2050, it should be 15%. Then milestone A2 says the increase in extinction rate is halted or reversed. This is where we are all trying to see, can we do something to make sure that really the loss of species around us stops? We've heard that we may lose about maybe 1 million species in the next maybe 10 years or so. And people seem to think that is a joke. It may actually happen, but imagine how vulnerable human beings are going to be when that happens. And then milestone A3 says genetic diversity of wild and domesticated species is safeguarded with an increase in proportion of species that have at least 90% of that genetic diversity maintained. So that is what we are thinking when we come to milestone 3. Now, let's go to goal B. And this is about human well-being, as meeting our needs from biodiversity. Very many people have said, if biodiversity was not useful actually to human beings, maybe nobody would be caring about it. And I think that is very, very true. So we are talking about biodiversity, conserving it, protecting it, doing all this because it is for our own well-being. And therefore, in goal B, we are saying nature's contribution to people are valued. Remember, we are beginning to unpack for you some of those 4 elements I talked about for the Vision 2050. So nature's contribution to people are valued, maintained, or enhanced through conservation and sustainable use. The wise use we are talking about in the Vision 2050. Supporting the goals of sustainable development. We told you already that because there's biodiversity loss, even the goals, sustainable development goals are being undermined. What are the milestones here? There are 2 of them. Nature and its contribution to people are fully accounted and inform relevant public and private decision making. Really, this is the gist of the matter. We should do that. Milestone B2, the long-term sustainability of all categories of nature's contribution to people is ensured with those currently in decline restored. You see, I told you we are unpacking all those elements of the Vision 2050 in this framework. Now let's go to goal C. And this is about benefits arising from utilization of genetic resources. We had a lot during the consultation we have had. And so in this goal, this time around, we have included monetary and non-monetary benefits in this goal. And the goal therefore reads, the benefits from utilization of genetic resources are shared fairly and equitably. Fairly and equitably, with a substantial increase in both monetary and non-monetary benefits shared, including for the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity. And it has basically 2 milestones. Milestone 1 says, the share of monetary benefits received by providers, including holders of traditional knowledge, has increased. It should be seen to increase. It should increase. And then milestone 2 says that non-monetary benefits, such as participation of providers, including holders of traditional knowledge in research and development, has increased. Then we go to to goal D. This is perhaps co-chair and I have been saying this along, a framework which is going to be developed and not resourced and not funded. Ladies and gentlemen, it is but just a piece of paper to gather dust in the shelves. So funding for this framework is going to be very, very fundamental to whether or not it actually achieves what we all want it to achieve. And therefore, there's a discussion about bridging or ending the talk about the funding gap in biodiversity. And the goal says the gap between available financial and other means of implementation and those necessary to achieve the 2050 vision is closed. The gap between available financial and other means of implementation and those necessary to achieve the 2050 vision is closed. We don't think when we reach 2050 that we are still talking about less funding for biodiversity. You know, people don't understand the value of. How on earth do we say we don't understand the value of biodiversity when it is what sustains us? You wake up, you are eating food from biodiversity, the clean air, the water, everything is biodiversity. And then we are saying there's a financing gap. We don't understand the value of biodiversity. Is that true? Now, milestone, there are 3 milestones here. Milestone D1 says adequate financial resources to implement the framework are available and deployed, progressively closing the financing gap up to at least 700 billion per year by 2030. Milestone D2, adequate other means, including capacity building and development, technical and scientific cooperation and technology transfer to implement the framework to 2030 are available and deployed. And then the last one says adequate financial and other resources for the period 2030 to 2040 are planned or committed by 2030. This was telling you that this framework is for 30 years. So by the time we are ending these first 10 years, it shouldn't be that when we're supposed to be starting 2031, then we are saying there's no money. No. It should be that we have already planned and committed resources in advance. And so then I will now go to the action targets, Chair, if you could go there. We've heard people say we have to learn to walk the talk. You heard about the vision, you heard about the mission, you heard about the milestones, you heard about those 9 things I've talked before. But if there is no action, then perhaps those remain as they are. So this is where we begin now to get into action. And so as I told you, we have the action targets that covers those under reducing threat. And action target 1 is about ensuring that all land and sea areas globally are under integrated biodiversity inclusive spatial planning, biodiversity inclusive spatial planning. Addressing land and sea use change, retaining existing intact and wilderness area. We need these areas for sure. We need these areas, and I'll be explaining them as we go along. Target 2 says, and this is about restoration, says ensure that at least 20% of degraded freshwater, marine, and terrestrial ecosystems are under restoration. We have degraded, we are going to take action to restore. There is no any other person going to do this for us. We have been part of the problem, we are going to be part of the solution. Target 3, ensure that at least 30% globally of land areas and sea areas, especially areas of particular importance for biodiversity and its contribution to people, are conserved through effectively and equitably managed, ecologically representative and well-connected system protected areas. That is the 30 by 30 goal, which we have had people really making a lot of effort to see it is there. Target 4 is about what we do to recover species. And he's saying we should be making or taking active management, ensure active management actions to enable the recovery and conservation of species and the genetic diversity of wild and domesticated species. These are all for our benefit, not only for biodiversity. Target 5, and this is about aspect of dealing with maybe illegal wildlife trade and sustainable use, especially those international trade. Here we are saying ensure that harvesting, trade, and use of wild species is first of all sustainable, it is legal, and safe for human health. You see, you could be trading and you're endangering human health. You're making your money, but human health is at stake. So this is why there's that combination. Then target 6 is about management of invasive species. We've had this problem for long, it's still with us. It's not about to go. We cannot say we are going to eradicate them completely, but what are we saying in this framework? Manage pathways for introduction of invasive alien species, preventing or reducing their rate of introduction and establishment by at least 50%, and control or eradicate invasive alien species to eliminate or reduce their impacts, focusing on priority species and priority sites. Those priority species, priority sites can only happen at national level. Target 7, this is where we begin seeing that this framework goes beyond, goes to other convention as well. This is about pollution. Pollution affects us. Don't think when you are doing pollution or we're talking, please don't ensure that the pollution doesn't harm biodiversity. That is only for biodiversity, it is for your own well-being, because you are going to eat the fish, which is having heavy metals maybe in the body. You are going to eat some crop or this which has those heavy metals. So really, when these species are healthy, we are healthy. It says reduce pollution from all sources to levels that are not harmful to biodiversity and ecosystem function and human health, including by reducing nutrients lost to the environment by at least half and pesticides by at least 2/3, and eliminating the discharge of plastic waste. Chair, next slide. I think before next slide, there is target 8. This is about climate change. If you are listening to news, you could have been hearing commitments already. I heard what China is planning, I heard what EU is planning. So this is for us to minimize the impact of climate change on biodiversity. But at the same time, that biodiversity can contribute to mitigation and adaptation through ecosystem-based approaches, contributing to at least 10 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. How much is that in economic terms? But also that even when we are going to take those measures on addressing climate change, it should not have negative impacts on biodiversity. Target 9, this is about the benefits we get from nature. This one I will not dwell a lot about. I've explained a lot. You see there are things to do with the medicine, to do with the food, to do with the nutrition. Right now we are in this pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll give an example here in my country where herbal medicine is proving fundamental in helping us to cope. Supposing we are busy destroying all the species, how are we going to cope actually with nature disappearing or plants or others disappearing around us? We are more vulnerable. Medicine will not be there. So any pandemic comes, we shall not have any solution to cope. Then target 10, this is about agriculture. The population of the world now is about 7.5 billion, could be 12 billion, 11 billion, 12 billion in 2050. More food will be needed. More must be fed. How is that going to happen? So in this target, all we are saying is that under agriculture, we should ensure that areas under agriculture, aquaculture, and forestry are managed sustainably, in particular through the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity, increasing productivity in those sectors, increasing productivity. Then target 11, this is about, we are talking about air quality, quality and quantity of water. All this again comes from biodiversity, even protection against hazards, natural hazards, extreme events. We are now seeing what is happening in the world. I think it is time to make peace with the nature because things are getting pretty bad. Target 12, this is about access and benefit sharing, says increase. So target 12 is about green spaces. Before I go to the other one I'm alluding to is in target 13. Target 12 is about green spaces in cities. You've seen how cities are expanding. Cities, in fact, it is projected that more people are going to move from rural areas to cities. Are we going to have any green space in cities? It means people are going to be less healthy if only people think of concrete structures. So target 12 says increase the area of access to and benefits from green and blue spaces for human health and well-being in urban areas and other densely populated areas. Target 13, then I'll hand over to co-chair. This one is about access to genetic resources, the benefit sharing that we've been talking about. Implement measures at a global level in all countries to facilitate access to genetic resources and to ensure the fair and equitable sharing of benefits arising from the use of genetic resources. You see here, we are saying that it is in all countries, a very ambitious target, and as relevant of associated traditional knowledge, including through mutually agreed terms, and of course, peak. So that is target 13 for you on access and benefit sharing. I'll now hand over to co-chair to take you in the other remaining targets and the slides that's still ahead. Co-chair.
Thank you very much, Francis. I hope you can hear me well. Francis, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so target, let's move through those group of targets of tools and solution, and you will see that they relate very much to each other. 14 is around mainstreaming, and there is a number of important elements there. Of course, there is mainstreaming within government and public sector with policy regulation. But it's important to note the presence of the word biodiversity values and accounts, as in national accounts that are important, and the use of the environmental assessment of impact as a tool, an important policy tool. You will see toward the end also the use of the terminology financial flow, all financial flow, including private sector, that are aligned with biodiversity values. So 14, more about the public sector. 15 is about business. Business, small and large, public and private. They assess, the intent here is to assess the dependency on biodiversity and their impact on it, and reduce negative impact by half, increasing the positive impact, and reducing biodiversity-related risk to the business, so to them. Moving more to full sustainability. For the first time, we have the mention of the extractive industries there, and then talking about the production practice, sourcing, and supply chain, showing in a sense circular economy, including use and disposal. That would not be complete if we were not complementing that with target 16, which is the choice of individual people, and ensuring that they both have the information that is needed for them to make choice, but also the alternative, an actual choice, focusing on sustainable consumption, avoiding overconsumption and waste. 17 is focusing on the adverse effect of biotechnology, and with a mention on human health. Now let's look at 18 and 19 that are directly related to goal D, and Francis has talked about the goal D, closing the gap, and he's talked about the reducing the gap in 2030 by 700 billion. This number 700 is actually composed of two parts. The first part is 18, and I'll come back with another slide to explain that perhaps a little bit better with a graphic. The first part is about reducing cost and reducing a negative incentive and subsidies by 500 billion, which is a number that seems to be very big. But when you look at the study of the OECD, that total the negative incentives are about 1,000 billion, and the parts coming from the most harmful coming from agriculture and energy at 700, 500 in that sense look like a totally reasonable number for 2030, including public and private economies, regulatory incentive, etc. The other part is increasing the resources available to address the issues. And there we use the Post-2020 Institute number of 200, bringing the current spending up to 200 billion. And within that, increasing financial flow to developing countries by 10 billion. Also important in that target is the mention of domestic resource mobilization, national biodiversity planning, strategy and capacity building, and the non-financial aspect. 20 is around knowledge, including traditional knowledge, and how people everywhere are able to take appropriate decisions because they have access to monitoring data and information. 21 is a very important target about the participation of indigenous people in local communities, women and girls and youth. And you will note that associated with indigenous people in local community, we've used the wording of right over lands, territories, and resource, which is a direct copy from language taken from the UN Declaration on the Right of Indigenous People. After this section on the target, there is also a number of important sections. As Francis said earlier, you will see that those have been streamlined and perhaps clarified And we're trying to focus on the principles and leave the details that are specific to the CBD in the decision coming from SBSTA and SBI. Nevertheless, we wanted to mention the various important strategy that exist there. That's under H. Under I, a number of enabling conditions that are also tying to indirect drivers of biodiversity loss identified by IPBES, including integrative governance and participatory approach and synergies. And then finally, a short note to say that there is a number of other indirect drivers, such as peace and population growth, identified by IPBES, but are not within the scope of the convention or this GBF and should be addressed elsewhere. A few words on the section on responsibility and transparency, which is quite different as for the others. It's now focusing on the principle, making a link with the planning, monitoring, reporting, and review work done under SBI, defining what is meant by the word responsibility and what is meant by transparency, setting up the dual objective of the system, that is both in terms of ensuring that the various national ambitions are adding up to those global targets that we will be setting up, but also enabling evaluation of the progress at every level. It should be an open system that enable others to build or attach their system to it. Outreach and awareness, also important, increasing understanding and raising awareness. And now let's have a look at the graph in one page, and it's a graphical representation of the graphic, and you will see it bring in the center the vision. That vision, as Francis has said, is further detailed into 4 goals that you see there. Those 4 goals are established to 2050, but when you bring them down to 2030, they're expressed into milestone from those A1, B1, etc., etc. In order to deal with that, we need the 13 targets. And one of the message we want to leave with you is this is not a choice or a menu in a restaurant where you pick one and you leave the other. In order to reach the goal B and the milestone associated with it, you actually need target 1 to 13. Avoiding one will leave a gap and would be a problem. And in order to accomplish those, you actually need target 14 to 21, which are the tools and the way you get to those. Of course, all is done in the context of enabling condition and mean of implementation. So if we move, sorry, that's a repeat of the slide, but that's the one I want to show you about the milestone and the target. So that's a financial picture. It's a classic graph with a timeline at the bottom and amounts on the y-axis. And then at the current time, there is a difference. The cost, what we need, is higher than what we have. And the idea of goal D is closing that gap by 2050 and have adequate measures. And that's done through 2 strategies, one which is reducing cost and the other one increasing resource available. Target 18 is about that reduction of cost by 500, and target 19 is about bringing up the resource available to 200. And that will leave a financial gap, but it's going to be 700 billion less than what it was, and we'll work our way down to 0. On a few words about other documents that are already posted and some coming. We've published a glossary like we did in the past, and as you've seen in previous version, we felt it was useful to let you know how we understood the terminology. We don't pretend that this is the only way to understand it, but at least you would have our own. You would understand how we took those terms, and we hope that that would be useful. As you can imagine, when Francis and I and the team were working through those targets, there was the few words you see on the screen. There is a lot of information around it in terms of context and what we think, and we thought it would be useful for you to have some of that information. And we're working on a set of one-pager for each of the goals and the targets that have all that information, that shows the links between those and goals and milestone, links with the Sustainable Development Goals, with the transformation pathway, and with the indicators, both the headlines and the components. So you've seen the headline indicators already. We're working on the component. But basically, those would be documents that you would have. Actually, they're not one-pager. They tend to be two-pager. But all the relevant information that you would need to understand the linkage and have the context that we have in mind. So that is not meant to be something to be negotiated, but something that help you to see where we come from and help you in your discussion. Few words on headline indicators. So you've asked us to work closely with the Secretariat in doing the update, and that has been a very useful piece of work for us, and hopefully for the Secretariat. The reduction is a lot less than what I personally had in mind, but I think we're getting to a result that makes sense. So from 48 to 38, but keep in mind that we have 4 goals, 21 targets, and then some targets are more than one numerical aspect, like goal A, as it's really about three different aspects. So you're starting from a number there, and 38 may not be just that bad. Keep in mind that among those 38, 28 are already done. The system are in place. There is no additional work to get the data. The one that needs some work are the 10 that are either existing within CBD and need change or are new. A few words on the digital sequence information agenda item at Open-Ended Working Group 3. We're making progress. My personal observation is that there is inconsistency in the understanding of the facts. That's still, I think we should be getting to a point where we have a common understanding of the facts, even if we have difference of views on what we do with those facts. The delay that is likely to happen with the COPs enable us to do further work. Particularly, there is the opportunity to do some detailed costing and analysis of the feasibility of the option. And then what we're proposing you is that in August, we look at the principle and see what we can do there, and that we look at the work plan and how we can use the time. And then when we get to the time for face-to-face negotiation at COP15 or before, we can further work in terms of solution. So the idea there, keep in mind that the further we're going to be progressing on a financial flow package, the further we're going to be advancing on this. Now, a little bit of a presentation of, you've seen that graph many times. What you've probably have not seen is the latest part. We've done a lot over the last couple years, as you can see there. We're now moving to August in the online part of the open-ended working group, and that will lead us to a face-to-face part of the negotiation, and eventually to a COP. So basically, what we're trying to portray here is that we're working very closely with SBSTA and SBI, and there will be important piece of work and draft decision coming to the COP that are related to GBF, and that will be important too. In terms of the process, what's going to happen in August, what we're trying to do is balance. We wanted to ensure that we do more than what we did in Rome in February of last year. But we also learned from the lesson of the May-June virtual session. And the conclusion that we reached is that we want to maximize the time in contact group to discuss draft 1 text. We're in the process of discussing the contact group. There is 3 to 5, and they will be organized along the structure of the text. We want to choose scope and role of and the co-chairs or the co-leads for those contact group consistently with people that have been active in Open-Ended Working Group 2 and in SBSTA and SBI. There is a lot of expertise, and perhaps ask those people if they could be available all the way to the face-to-face part of Open-Ended Working Group 3. So what will the contact group do? If there is consensus around certain aspects, obviously they need to document it. If not, this is not a negotiation. Let's try to see how we can progress. And if in the end it is not possible to get to a common view, let's document it. And let's try to identify issues that could be for which it could be useful to do some more further work or some further discussion. And let's try to make the best use of the September to December time. The outcome will be a report, and we're working with the Bureau for a face-to-face meeting in the early part of 2022. Quickly, a summary of the various documents. You can see here the draft and the draft COP decision, the DSI paper, and the English version of the glossary are published. The other language of the glossary should be published very soon, today, tomorrow. I have not checked this morning. One pager will come as soon as we can, not before next week. The headline indicators are you'll see here, are being published on the 12th as well, and the other language very soon. And that will be followed by the component indicators as soon as we can. So that completes the presentation. I will now hand the floor back to Jyoti. Jyoti, the floor back to you.
Thank you so much, Basil and Francis. That was a fantastic presentation of the draft that we have all put together. Thank you very much for that. We would now like to invite your questions based on the presentation from the co-chairs. I want to remind you that we will only take questions of clarification or understanding based on the co-chair's presentation. This is not a negotiation, so we will not be taking up any questions that relate to the content of the framework. Please type your questions in the question box. We have quite a few already, and we will start taking these right after I've read out these instructions. And if you are joining us via Facebook or YouTube Live, kindly send them to us on live@cbd.int. So that is live@cbd.int. We will collect a couple of questions so that the co-chairs can address them together. For participants dialing in by phone, but I just looked and saw that I don't think there are any, we will now give you a chance to ask your questions for clarification and understanding orally before we move on to written questions. So if there is anyone who is here by phone, but I don't think there's anyone. I'm just looking at the list. Nope. So we can go to the written questions now. We have about 1 hour for your questions. The first half an hour we'll try and take questions related to the framework, and then any questions on modalities that you might have, and to brief you on the road ahead to Working Group 2023, Part 3. And I am pleased to say that David Cooper, our Deputy Executive Secretary, is also here with us today. And so if there are any questions related to the road ahead, please do go ahead and ask us. So now I will ask a few questions and then invite the co-chairs to respond. So we have a question from Jose Calper on milestone D1, but I think you might have responded already, but I'll ask you the question anyway. How did you come up with a figure of USD 700 billion per year? We have a question from Piet van der Meer. With the GBS, aiming to go beyond the CBD, do we not risk that the framework will become even more general, i.e. less tangible and verifiable? And the last question I'll ask before I give it back to you is from Matthias Bertram. Could you please explain how goal A element on 15% increase in area connectivity and integrity is linked with milestones and the action target 3, but also the other targets 1 and 2? Thanks. Over to you.
A lot of different questions there. So, Francis, maybe I'll start and get add to it. The first question.
Hi, Basil. You're not very clear.
On 700.
Basil, you're breaking up.
So saw a question from colleagues at the Jeff that I may be able to answer at the same time. So as you saw in the figure, what we're looking at is how we can close between what is needed and available. And the ultimate goal is to get that gap to 0 as an interim point.
Hi,
we want to
Basil, you may wish
that
to.
gap.
Basil, you may wish to turn off your camera.
That you should be decreasing that gap, and what we're trying to do there is to do two things. First, decrease the cost. And then I'll pass to Francis if the strategy, the decrease of the negative, but also increase the issues. 700. The zone,
Hi, Basil.
Goal A, the milestone, and the targets. So basically, goal here. Okay, Francis, can you take over?
Yes, I would not heard what you've been saying. Perhaps I don't know whether it is connectivity on my side here. Jyoti, were you hearing Basil? You didn't.
I think you have to start from the beginning.
Okay, I also didn't hear him as well. So, well, with the milestone D1, how did you come up with the figure of 700 billion? Actually, this is based on studies that have been done. And also this based on other previous existing information that we have concerning the financing gap. They're actually divided into two. So you have one which is on reducing or redirecting subsidies, which is put at 500 billion per year, and then the international financial flows, which are estimated at $200 billion per year. So that is how the 700 billion comes up. Then there is the question with the GBF aiming to go beyond the CBD. Do we not risk that the framework will become even more general, i.e. less tangible and perhaps less verifiable? I think we shouldn't fear that at the end of the day that CBD is going to get less and less visible out there. What you've said in the beginning, first of all, is that biodiversity cuts across so many sectors, because it's another sector will do an activity but will impact on biodiversity. Look at chemicals, for example, an industry somewhere is somebody is doing manufacturing, somebody doing extraction, but these are things that eventually impacts on biodiversity. So when you're crafting therefore the targets for biodiversity, you find yourself, getting into contact with so many other sectors that one needs to really bring on board. But having said that, if you also read the framework itself, you will find still there are those other targets that tend to be more specific towards biodiversity, but we integrate it with the others. So we are thinking that since biodiversity is impacted on by so many sectors, we have to bring on board a number of sectors, really bring the issue of biodiversity to the level it should be recognized for. So that is the way we see it. And we also had, during the regional consultations, way back in January, which ran up around, I think, April, May, and even in other consultations, that the three objectives of the CB needed to be done in a balanced manner, that we should have conservation, we should have sustainable use, and then the equitable sharing of the benefits arising from utilization of genetic resources. So when you look at this framework, we reflect those. They're in different targets, but they are there. So try to scan that and see whether those three objectives of the CBD is not reflected here in the framework. If it is, then you will know that that being the core business of biodiversity, that interest of the convention is still intact, but we bring on board these others. Then there is the question, the other question was on, could you please explain how goal A elements of 15% increase in area connectivity and which is linked with the milestone A1 net gain? Of course, if you look at the area that we already have right now, because in the beginning, or in the 2011-2020, we had a target of terrestrial was supposed to be actually 17%, then the marine was supposed to be 10%. But now we have increased this to 30 by 30. But that aside, we still think that there will be a lot of effort actually to increase for us these other areas of connectivity of, let me look at the question again. Can you please explain how goal A on 15% increase in area connectivity and temperature is linked with milestone A? So milestone A is about net gain. In other words, if we are going to have this 30%, 30 by 30 as our mission by 2050, sorry, that is by 2030, 30 by 30 by 2030. If we have that, by the time we get there, then I think even when we progress further to 2050, we could have still added on more of these areas. And of course, taking into account the increase in human population and so forth, it may not be realistic to put a very big figure. So the 5% is only meant to let us know that by 2050, we could have an additional area of 15% in what we already have got, if at all we can make that progress. Because if you go beyond the net gain, that means you have achieved something. You see, there is just, if you look at offsets, there's where you just reach at a level you want. If it is 30 by 30 or if it is no net loss, you're just there, you're not moved above that. But if you can even go beyond what we are projecting, then we could still have perhaps the earth being better protected. So that's why there is that element of thinking there could be a net gain in protected areas or in these areas under connectivity for the next maybe 15 years, 30 years from now. Is Basil back?
I am back. I'm back. Can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yeah, you can add there. Yeah, sorry.
No, not much to add. I think it's particularly important to understand the relationship between the goals and the milestone and the targets. I know that there was discussion among parties about what are the role of the milestones. I also know that some parties were supporting the notion of having a way to verify whether the set of targets and action we're taking are actually making a difference. And in that sense, those milestones are meant to be measuring the states of things, ecosystem, benefit sharing, while the targets themselves and the performance indicators associated with those are at a kind of a high level, which is about, how those actions carried out. That's the only thing I wanted to add. Back to you, Jyoti.
Thanks so much. I'm going to ask a question from Carlos Manuel, our CEO and chairperson of the Global Environment Facility and our financial mechanism. First, my big congratulations to both co-chairs, parties, and the Secretariat for this first deck. With regards to target 18 and 19, can you explain on how this can be measured and monitored? Will there be a results framework? How can we improve the financial reporting mechanism? Then we have a question from Verona Colantes. What are the next steps in terms of providing inputs to draft 1? And from Sonam Kandu, please clarify what bio-inclusive spatial planning means under Target 1. Under Target 7, what is nutrients lost to environment, and can we really eliminate? I won't ask the next, but up to this part. Thanks.
Thank you. Francis, let me try and see if connection worked this time, but I rely on you if it does not. Three very important questions, and I'll start with the elements coming from our colleagues at the Global Environment Facility. Yes, there will be a performance management or a result management framework associated with the GEF. We heard very clearly from parties that they wanted a more robust system. Some part of those systems are already there. That's the headline indicators that are published at the same time. And if you look down under the target 18 and 19, you will see that there is proposed headline indicators. Can we make it better? Yes, definitively. And I think as we progress through the discussion and later negotiation of the framework, we're going to need to look side by side at the indicator, at the targets, and at the indicators. You will see that we're talking about national financial reports, and the notion of having those mentioned in the framework is to encourage countries to adopt some kind of national financial reports. We're not prejudging that those would be exactly the type that we know now, but definitively overall there will be a stronger system. Definitively also keep in mind that the details that are specific to the CBD will be in the SBI, the decision going to the COP from the SBI, and the resource mobilization strategy should have a number of details that are related to this. The second question on the next step to input to the draft. Well, the first step in that process are the 2 weeks from August 23rd to September 3rd. That's where we're going to be starting discussion, and that's an important point where parties and stakeholders will have an opportunity to express their views on that, and then we'll have an opportunity to formulate how they want to use the time. And then after that, we know that we're going to need some face-to-face negotiation, and plans are being done to put those together. Finally, a third set of questions around what is meant by biodiversity inclusive land use planning. So basically, the idea there is that under Target 3, we're focusing on the protection and conservation of a certain portion of the landscape. But actually, what is the ultimate goal is managing the whole landscape, including areas that are set for productive purpose or for people dwelling. And then there is a number of land use planning that exist around the world, but they're not all the same. Some are very deliberately including biodiversity consideration in their systems, but others may not be there. And we're trying to be clear in this version that those that are useful from a biodiversity perspective are the ones that are considering biodiversity. And then finally, the point on nutrients. So we're talking about nutrients that are used mainly in the agriculture processes, and we try to word the targets in the sense that we're worrying, or we're considering only those that are leaving the agricultural process and find their ways in the environment, generally through leachage in water. So basically, it's about the nutrient, the amount of the nutrients that is lost from the agricultural process into the environment and have a negative impact there. Francis, over to you.
Yeah, just to add a little on the question by the CEO of Jeff, I think another element he wanted to know is how can I think we improve the financial reporting mechanism. I think this is something being discussed or will be discussed under SBI, and definitely those gaps that are there will be addressed. And it is something that, of course, is very critical for us to handle if we are going to really be looking at whether or not the resources we are talking about are actually flowing into countries or there is effort in that direction. So this is going to be discussed and under SBI. And I think still there's a request for countries, even as I speak, to really do reporting on the financial mechanism. So that could be the other way of looking at it. Then there is this question I see raised here, co-chair, was can we really eliminate discharge of plastic waste, or do we need to reduce them? Now, when we're drafting this framework, the question has always been on us. You are not ambitious with your framework. You're being a little bit too, I don't know, too soft, or you're not putting things that is challenging enough. It is like saying eradicating poverty by a certain year, but we know it is a difficult thing to do, eradicating poverty. So this can be difficult, but it should be so that we all work towards that. If you say reduce, then reduce by how much, reduce by what, reduce what, you begin, creating a lot of other questions for you to answer. But when we say eliminate that, then we are making it upon ourselves to do the best we can, so that even if we don't reach there, we shall see how far we have not reached there, and then see how to correct it. I think, Oshia, that would have been the other addition perhaps to make. Then there is a question here. The discussion on the headline indicators, will it be included in the mandate of the contact group on Post-2020? I think this person is meaning, will it be discussed perhaps in the meeting we're talking about, the virtual meeting in about a month's time? Yes, this is an item that will be looked at. And then the other one was, this is intended to be a framework for all. Important safeguards for this could be ensuring the implementation of a whole of society and RBA approaches. In your view, how are the two approaches strengthened in draft 1 of the GBF? Now, being a framework that is meant to handle all things, broad as you have said, because biodiversity is very difficult for you to really leave out stakeholders. So we think that looking at the element of the whole society of an RBA approaches, this can actually be possible if we all try to understand that at the end of the day, the framework is trying to achieve a number of things, but not only one aspect. So let's try to look at this framework as one that is challenging, but one that can help us bring a number of stakeholders on board, and then we can look at the gaps that exist. Co-chair, maybe you want to add there.
No, in terms of the plastic response, yes, it's ambitious, but keep in mind that all the numerical aspects in the framework are backed by the advice from Substar, particularly add to documents. So that's the science advice, and we've been told by the Substar or by others that those are realistic goals and those are minimum aspects if we want to reach the vision. Important to keep in mind. Thank you.
Hi, so we have a question on what is meant by biodiversity values in Target 14. I think we have a definition in the glossary, so maybe we could be happy with that. We have a question on what do targets mean at national level, Target 7, for example. And then several questions talk about the role of different actors. So, you know, the whole all of society approach, local, private sector, etc. Can the co-chairs talk a little bit more about what it means what is a framework for all? So, you know, maybe that could also explain some questions around, maybe it's a very broad framework, but maybe we could explain what is a framework for all. Thanks.
Thank you. That's a very important point. So one of the point in the diagnostic of the situation up to 2020 was that notion that the biodiversity framework was seen as a biodiversity framework for the environment, for the CBD focal points, and not much for everybody else. So one of the starting points in the mandate you gave us is to create a framework that addresses many parts of society. When you look at the targets on reducing negative incentives and subsidies, that is generally not within the purview of the environment minister. It is something that is within the purview of finance and budget minister. And what we're seeing is increasingly not only us pushing those ideas, but those forums asking us to get engaged. So we're having a lot of very useful conversation with the World Bank Group, with the Food and Agriculture Organization. So all those actors are realizing that the crisis or the situation we're facing in terms of decrease in biodiversity is affecting them. That is affecting the bottom line of business, the economic activities, and the economic balance of countries. And they want to be active. Everybody recognize that the environment ministry is central. But basically, what we're seeing is interest at all levels, from governments to private sector, to many lateral organizations to be engaged into that. So we try to create a framework that will be written in a that is as open as possible, and that enable a number of other actors to work in. There is a question also around how the targets are stepped down at the national level. So definitely, the capacity of the various countries to contribute is very different. And when you look at Target 3, with the proposal for protect and conserve, obviously the capacity of countries will be different. What we're going to need to establish and what's being discussed is how do we set a system by which each country is providing some targets on which they're able to contribute, and we're able to add up or collate all those information. And then we'll see whether this addition get to a global number. So if we set global numbers, for example, in Target 3, the proposal is 30%. If you add everything else, those countries that can do less, those countries that can do more, and we're there, that's good. But if we're below, then there will be a need for adjusting what we can. And then biodiversity value, good question from my friend Deb. Please look at the glossary. I think you're going to find a lot of useful explanation for this terminology and for many others. Francis, over to you.
Yeah, actually, when we are speaking about the framework for all, we thought maybe we would have been clear on that, but since it comes back, then it means we have to see how to explain that. I don't know whether we shall, in the next stop, try to come up with a short text that addresses that. But as Coach has said, if you look at these targets, and you relate yourself to the situation at the national level, because this framework itself is going to be implemented at national level, of course, with the support coming from subnational governments, regional and global levels. Now, if you look at the action that happens at national level, you will find that climate change, land degradation, issues on threatened species, name all those other conventions, actually most of them will be encompassed within biodiversity. So if you're going to call stakeholders to say participate in the implementation of this framework, and they see that there's no target, for example, that relates to climate change, there's no target on agriculture, there's no target that relates to this, then we say, but purely we don't see how relevance here, because everything is purely biodiversity, not bringing on the other sectors. But because biodiversity supports the other sectors, that is why then you find we made the effort to bring on board a number of these, as Co-Chair said, even including the private sector. There is that target, I think target 15, that talks about the extractive industries there. So there are a lot of things that happen. And therefore, since we have so many stakeholders on board when it comes to biodiversity, that's why we are saying is a framework for all, because it tends to bring everybody together. It doesn't exclude sectors. Here's what I think I could add to what you said, Coach.
Thank you. So now let me ask you a question on indicators. When will the indicators be made available, and will they be there for the negotiation? Then I have a question from Amrai von Hayes. Please, apologies for my pronunciation. Please congratulate the co-chairs and other contributors on draft 1. Could the co-chairs clarify what the baseline or frame of reference is where goals, milestones, or targets aim for increases in biodiversity levels? Example, an increase of at least 15% in the area, or reductions on net outcomes, example under milestone A. Is this, for example, relative to 2020 levels or other? Thanks. Go ahead.
Yes, I think I'll touch on this one of the indicators, then Co-Chair to go into the other one. When will the indicators be made available? Will they be negotiated? Now, the indicators, we are working on them. We are right now, I think we have made progress on the headline indicators, and that was something that we intend to have them available for people to review them. Again, we have to say here that when we meet in the meeting we are going to have in August, it's not going to be for actually negotiations per se. That is just to get your views, you review those and give us your feedback. Negotiations will actually happen in the physical meetings. But also we are working on the other indicators for the components, and those will be also coming up, I think around 26. Well, there is still that target to give you that. So we will be seeing more of this being posted on the website as time goes on. And of course, we will be notifying you through the Secretariat. Co-Chair, you may want to add something. Co-Chair, you are muted, or are you muted? Are you on?
I am on.
Okay.
On the okay. On the question around baseline, if you look at the document presenting the headline indicators, there is information provided about the availability of data. It is going to be a useful conversation. We are aware that there is different views in terms of both periods of reference and baseline, and it is important to understand the difference in those concepts. And that's why we've included those concepts in the glossary. But generally speaking, I think what I heard from Substar is most experts are telling us that data is available for a relatively short period of time, and the advice is to stick with 2020 as the baseline. So we're looking forward to the discussion. It does not have to be the same baseline everywhere, but I think it is important to have a good understanding of the concept and what is practically possible. So we may very well look at a period a long time in the past in terms of what would be a pristine environment, and we know that if you want to really go back to the natural extent of coverage being at its most in Western Europe or Eastern North America, you go well before Industrial Revolution to Elizabethan time, which may or may not be useful for us. And then I think Francis have talked about the indicators, and when we prepared the framework, we always had the indicators open on our screen, and we were always referring to them. So I expect that when you start the discussion in August, you will have opened the list of indicators when you will be talking about the targets and the goals. Back to you, Jyoti.
Yeah, maybe to add something, Jyoti, a little bit there. So in addition to what you've said, Coach, I think when all these documents are then made available, it would then be important that the framework itself is read in tandem with all that will be accompanying it, so that all these questions, people might find actually the answers in there. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. I have one last question for you, because I think this question will help us explain all the different documents we are doing for the monitoring that will make up the monitoring framework. So here's the question. Due to the limited number of headline indicators, is it expected that some of the components of targets will not be covered by headline indicators? For instance, the elements of effective and equitable management in Target 3. Does that mean that some of the components of the targets will be prioritized over others? Last question. Thank you.
Maybe Francis, can I start? Actually, what we were doing, if you remember, when we published Draft 0, the performance, the monitoring framework was organized around, there was the target, those targets were decomposed into components, and then the proposal for indicators were aligned with those components. We're going through exactly that exercise now with our colleagues in the Secretariat. And the observation is absolutely right. There won't be enough headline indicators to cover all of the comments, nor should it be. However, what we want is to ensure that there is, in those cases where there is no headline indicators, that there is a component indicator. In terms of whether those component indicators will be more important than others, That's a discussion that should take place as we move forward in the discussion on the framework. At the end of the day, I think from Francis and my perspective, what we want to ensure is that you're presented with a system that is comprehensive and complete, whether the performance is addressed by headline indicators or by component indicators is something that is secondary in our views. What is important is that there is no gap. If we had a gap, that would be a serious problem in the system. Over to you, Francis.
Yeah, I think in addition to what you have said, Co-Chair, also what we have noticed, of course, that when we're working on the component indicators, we've tried our best not to duplicate a component indicator again, bring it, I mean, a headline indicator to bring it to the component indicator. So you will see that we try to clean it up. You will see that when the document is available. And as he said, only where we find that maybe the headline indicator is missing, then the component indicator has to be there. But in some of them, you're going to see both the headline and the component indicators, as long as they are distinct. If the headline indicator is very distinct and the component also distinct. But I have to say that with the headline indicators, and I don't know whether we said it earlier, this is what we expect all parties, all stakeholders there to report on. All. Where you see the headline indicators, it will mean we have to report on those. Maybe in our national reports and so forth. Yeah, that's the addition I wanted to make.
Thank you so much. So I think we've reached the end of this part of the session, but there are lots and lots of questions on the road ahead, and a lot of confusion between the first meeting in August of the working group and the second meeting, and what all of this means for COP15. I would like now to invite David Cooper, our Deputy Executive Secretary, to say a few words on maybe helping us clarify the road ahead. And then we will come back to the co-chairs so that they can brief us on the road to what they expected Working Group 3 in August. Thanks, David. I know it's a very last minute request, and so thanks a lot for accepting to do this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jyoti, and thank you to everyone online for their participation in this important webinar and for the questions. The Bureau and the host countries for the upcoming meetings are still discussing some of the details, and we expect to be able to announce the final roadmap within the next week or two. But I will give you some sort of preliminary outline of the shape of those discussions. And the discussions in the Bureau have really been informed by the recognition that through the virtual meetings, those that were held for Substa 24 and SBI 3, also the informal meetings in preparation for them, and now, of course, the upcoming meeting of the working group in August, they've been very useful in moving the agenda forward. They've been quite successful in undertaking the first reading of items, as we refer to them, and there's been a lot of progress also in contact groups, including text-based discussions on many issues quite successfully under Substa and SBI. But we've also learned, I think, that it's quite difficult to then finalize those discussions and to approve text in plenary sessions. And we have this experience in Substa and SBI. And so there's a broad consensus among the parties, as the co-chairs have referred, that physical in-person meetings will be needed to finalize the negotiations in Substa 24, in SBI 3, and of course in the working group on the Post-2020 framework. So we're looking to hold a meeting as soon as possible, taking into account, of course, all the steps that will need to be put in place to make it likely, in fact, that such a physical meeting could go ahead, even though the pandemic is continuing. Of course, the pandemic is improving in some countries, but not in others. And so we're looking towards January for such a meeting, but this should be confirmed soon, as I mentioned, within the next week or two. Of course, that means that the final approval, adoption of the Post-2020 framework and of the other substantive issues coming from those meetings can only take place after that. And so we're looking for the physical meeting of COP15 also to be taking place then some weeks or months later in the first half of 2022 in Kunming in China. It's also recognized, of course, though, that it's important to keep the momentum and to keep also the political momentum towards those discussions. And so the plan is still to open COP as planned on October the 11th for a first part of the meeting, which will include a high-level segment that can provide continued political momentum and hopefully strengthen political momentum towards an effective post-2020 framework. So that's the overall roadmap. And of course, then before October, we have the working group in August, from August the 23rd to September the 3rd. We hope that parties will come ready to engage in text-based discussions, but I'm sure the co-chairs will have more to say on that. And then, of course, the results of the working group in August and September will be then carried over until the meeting resumes physically and probably in January. So that's the overall picture, and I'll hand back to you, Jyoti.
Thanks a lot, David. I hope that provided some clarity on the way ahead. And now I want to thank you for your excellent questions, everyone. They were really, really good, and we had a good discussion. But now I will like to use this time to request the co-chairs to brief us on their expectations for the working group 3 meeting in August. Basil and Francis, you have the floor.
So let me try, and if you cannot hear me, please signal me one way or the other. I think the August, so David has explained very clearly the process, and you remember that the Bureau has adopted a step-by-step approach, and I think a number of us has observed that there is a limit to what we can do online, and yet what the Bureau is telling us, and I think this is matching many people's observation, is as it relates to the open-ended working group, there is still a number of steps and piece of work that can be done online, and that's how we went ahead with the online part of the open-ended working group 3 in August. This will be your opportunity as parties and stakeholders to express your views and to talk about your opinion, what you think about the various targets. So definitely, we think it's going to be a very important step. And then judging from there, we will see what we can do. I'm sure each of us will do some important work in the period after. But we're also equally clear, and I want to repeat it another time, that the important step of our formal negotiation will take place in person at a later point in time. So don't diminish the value of what we're doing in August. That's going to be very important. It's going to speed things up. We get together, also provide an opportunity to further work, formally or informally. You will tell us how you want to do that. The idea is we're faced with a delay nobody likes, but we're faced also with an opportunity with further time ahead of us. So look forward as late to the if we're looking forward for good.
Faisal, we're losing you again. We've lost you again.
And I think you will most of you will.
Faisal, we've lost you again.
Agree with me.
Faisal, we have lost you.
That
maybe Francis, you want to take over? And then
yeah, I think
come back?
I don't know. Yeah, Basil, maybe you'll come back. Sorry, this is the challenge that you know, comes up with the online kind of considering issues. Anytime this can happen. My coach has been having a very reliable network. I see it's encountered a challenge there. But let me just add to what David has said. First, for those that could be remembering, recently we had the Substar 2024 and SBI 3. He's talking also, I think. So maybe a fast wait.
For
he's still speaking.
Faisal, are you speaking or Francis?
No, me, I'm available. I'm just waiting for. No, I'm available. I can speak, Jyoti. It is just that Basil is speaking, so I was trying not to. So if I can take the floor, Basil, which is okay.
I don't think he's speaking. I think it's the old.
So we're trying to. We're trying.
Okay. Okay. So let me then take the floor. Is that done, Jyoti? Okay. All right. Sorry.
I think it's the old message coming through.
Sorry, this is technology, and it can let us down or whatever. But those who participated recently in the Substar and SBI 3 virtual meetings, you saw actually what happened in that meeting. What I want to emphasize here is that when actually we go for this virtual meeting, of course, as David has said, there will be this text-based negotiation. I mean, a discussion, not negotiation. This language, please don't quote me there. It is just for you to discuss, to review the text as they are. Now, much of the discussion will be in the contact group. Contact group. Please, when you go for that meeting, make sure in the contact group, because what is going to be discussed there is going to constitute the outcome. of this meeting, of this virtual meeting, because it will come to the plenary, we consider it, and then when it is considered in the plenary, what we shall do next is actually to suspend the meeting, and then the outcome of those contact groups as considered in the plenary will be attached to the report of the meeting. That is what is going to be looked at in the physical meeting in January. So please, just to remind you, be very active in the contact group so that by the time we go to the physical meeting, your views are there. And then it facilitates the discussion to move faster in the physical meeting. So don't miss out on the contact groups. We are going to review and we shall receive your text coming from there. Thank you.
Okay, so now maybe I can just add a few words on the modalities. The working group session will use the same platform and modalities as we have for the SDI and SAPTA formal sessions. We will have plenary sessions and contact groups, as Francis just mentioned, and we will be using the same platform, Interactio. I believe that 26th of July is the date for everyone to send in their the delegations. There will be viewer and speaker logins like last time, and so I think people should be familiar with how we have been conducting meetings for nearly a year now. So hopefully there will not be any hopefully it will all go smooth and there won't be any surprises. There is one question on the high-level segment and on the high-level segment being convened by Colombia and the Kunming Declaration. We should have more information in the coming weeks, and you should be able to find that on our website or through a notification very soon. And I think we are. If you keep coming to our website, you will find that it will be updated with all the information in the coming weeks. I think that brings us to the end of our session, because I don't see that there are any other questions. No, there's one. In that case, can we please have an agreement that contact groups will be timed so that there is enough time for civil society groups to participate, and that participants in Asia and Pacific will not be disadvantaged? I think we have had this discussion in the Bureau already. So I think that until and unless Francis and Basil want to add anything, I think we could end the session here. And I can hand it up over Basil. Yes?
Yeah, sorry. Apologies for the connection problem on my hand. That's part of what we live with. On the contact group and the meeting in August, keep in mind that we tried something a little bit different in terms of organizing. There will be no session on the weekend, on Saturday and Sundays. And we tried to keep a much lighter type of schedule, and learning from the experience and trying to limit the total number of sessions in any 24-hour period. So that should ease it a little bit for our Asian and Oceania colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Basil. I think that's the end of our questions here, and I will hand it back to you both for closing remarks. Francis?
Basil, are you there? Just want to know if Basil is there.
I am still there. Yes.
Okay, please take the floor, because your network might have issues. Then I can make the last one.
So thank you very much. Not much to add. We're looking forward to the discussion in August. I think it's important that you came as well as equipped as you can. And I don't want to start a flow of questions, etc. But if a group of you have a certain particular question, Francis and I are available to help you and guide you. So please contact Jyoti, myself, or Francis, and we want you to be as ready as you can for August. Over to you, Francis.
Yeah, thank you. Just a few addition to what Co-Chair has said. I think for us, really, as we come to the close of this meeting, we hope that we have tried to make you understand a little bit this draft one. Of course, if you're just reading a text, sometimes without being perhaps given more detail about it, your understanding might be different from when you hear something a little bit about the text you read. So we hope that the interaction we've had today has helped you to internalize and understand the framework a little bit better. We may not have this kind of presentation maybe in future, especially when we go to the virtual meeting, because the time will be short. We might just go straight to consideration of the agenda item. So this presentation was meant to actually help you understand this in advance of the upcoming meeting. So we thank you for your participation. We cannot take it for granted. People are busy with a lot of meetings these days. Zoom is everywhere, but having participated in ours, we really thank you for that. And please stay safe. We hope to see you soon. Bye.
Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for joining. On behalf of the Secretariat, we're very pleased to have had you participate here with us today. Thank you.